The palace grins were always rehearsed, too spotless to be real. Behind every polished wave and photograph lived a tension no one dared acknowledge. Not until now, when whispers surfaced that Catherine had privately questioned Camilla's right to the crown. It detonated a fuse that had been burning in silence for years. But was this eruption a personal clash, or the start of something far more dangerous? Before we dig into the truth hiding beneath this royal storm, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single unraveling twist. From afar, the monarchy appeared serene, elegant, obedient to ritual. Yet anyone who'd spent even a night inside those ancient corridors knew a colder presence lingered beneath the gold. The signs had always existed, slight, fleeting, but unmistakable. Brief, brittle exchanges at public events. A stiffness in their stance during shared duties. The way their eyes drifted away, just a millisecond too quickly. Those who noticed the patterns saw it long before anyone spoke a word. Catherine's effortless command of public affection cast a long, icy shadow over Camilla, whose acceptance by the nation was always delicate, conditional, and painfully repaired. And as Catherine's influence spread, Camilla's unease sharpened. The palace could disguise nearly anything, but it couldn't cover the growing belief across Britain that Catherine was the steady pulse of the monarchy, the future people trusted, the symbol they clung to. Then came the whisper, one conversation, hidden, hushed, but strong enough to fracture the foundation. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't public. It wasn't supposed to exist beyond a sealed room. But the echo of Catherine quietly questioning whether Camilla's position was truly as unshakable as the palace claimed sent a tremor through halls built on centuries of power. Staff at Sandringham said the air that weekend felt charged, the kind that makes even veteran royal aides tread lightly. Mere hours after the alleged comment, protocols shifted. Senior aides were moved without explanation. Communications teams were instructed to ignore specific inquiries. A cold tension settled over the estate. Several staff later admitted they believed they had witnessed the first ripple of a much deeper quake. What escalated the situation further were the fragments, leaked scraps of private correspondence. Words like discrepancies, contradictions, and unresolved matters appeared in memos never meant to see daylight. Catherine, famous for her composure and precision, reportedly built these suspicions not in moments, but over months. Nothing about her concerns seemed rash or emotional. They looked studied, deliberate, and quietly confirmed. And when rumors spread that insiders had long described Camilla's title as provisional, everything changed. It was no longer Catherine versus Camilla. It became the clash between legacy and truth, favor and protocol, the future queen, and the woman whose ascent had always carried unanswered questions. This wasn't a petty dispute. It was the emergence of a fault line that had existed far longer than anyone realized. And as this silent battle intensified, it exposed a far more unsettling truth. Catherine's challenge wasn't just personal. It targeted the very blueprint of royal legitimacy itself. But to understand why her suspicions struck so deeply, we must return to the murky origins of Camilla's rise and the secrets entwined with it. What if Camilla's crown wasn't earned, but arranged? Royal sources insist a covert pact smoothed her path, sidestepping long-standing royal rules and public approval. Hidden behind reinforced doors lies a trail of documents, and Catherine may have unearthed far more than the monarchy ever intended. There's a term the palace refuses to utter now: the silent pact, the gentleman's agreement, a phrase steeped in buried truths, signed without a sound, wrapped in layers of royal secrecy. Those close to the inner sanctum say it was a covert pact hammered out between Charles and a select few advisors long before the late Queen's final days. This wasn't a public blessing. It was a calculated alignment, an engineered pathway ensuring Camilla's rise would unfold smoothly, shielded from public debate or parliamentary resistance. It carried no legal force, yet was treated like doctrine, a silent vow breathed behind velvet curtains. When Queen Elizabeth delivered what the world believed to be her heartfelt endorsement of Camilla's future title, insiders insist her approval carried far more restrictions than anyone outside the palace realized. That carefully crafted statement, released during a moment of national sentiment, was later molded into a definitive stamp of permanence. But those who understood the late Queen's language knew it was nothing of the sort. Her acceptance, they say, came with terms, expectations, and strict conditions, ones that were discreetly discarded the moment Charles took the crown. The public never witnessed the internal disputes, the midnight negotiations, or the frantic rewriting of the palace's succession announcements. Yet Catherine did, and what she uncovered was far more explosive than anyone imagined. Legal documents tied to Charles and Camilla's marriage revealed obscure clauses and hidden allowances the public was never meant to see. Catherine's ceremonial review of the transition files reportedly left her visibly shaken. Within those archives were traces of last-second policy tweaks, emergency reinterpretations of royal marital rules, and most striking of all, a coronation preparation folder, stamped provisional designation spousal role, pending review. The implications were staggering. It suggested that even during the planning stages, the palace had not fully secured or agreed on how Camilla's role would be defined or defended. Sources claim one internal memo bluntly described Camilla's status as a narrative recalibration crafted for public acceptance, a strategic illusion meant to stabilize the monarchy during a turbulent era. In simpler language, Camilla wasn't elevated by established right. She was positioned there through a meticulously engineered PR operation. Her title, responsibilities, and even her visibility were sculpted for optics, not tradition. And once Catherine, armed with these revelations, began raising the questions no one else dared articulate, she risked dismantling years of carefully woven deception. But Catherine's inquiry wasn't born from paranoia. It was triggered by what she believed to be a violation of the monarchy's foundational rules. The word fraud is almost forbidden within the institution, yet insiders say her quiet investigation exposed unsettling irregularities in Camilla's marital timeline, irregularities with implications that reached directly into the core of royal succession. What began as a subtle curiosity became a labyrinth of legal contradictions no one was prepared to confront. Already rattled by what she had learned about the secret pact and the manipulated coronation paperwork, Catherine pressed further. Her scrutiny moved from titles to dates, from ceremonial roles to legal documentation. And what she found wasn't mere clerical negligence. It hinted at a calculated breach of procedural integrity at the monarchy's highest tier. Charles and Camilla's civil ceremony had long been framed as a dignified reconciliation of private affection and public duty. But when Catherine analyzed the paperwork, red flags appeared instantly. Dates didn't match. Signatures looked rushed, added after the fact. One file carried a notarization timestamp that inexplicably preceded the issuance of the marriage license itself. The inconsistency was subtle, but in the realm of royal legitimacy, even the faintest discrepancy casts a monumental shadow. Catherine allegedly discovered proof of retroactive edits, documents connected to the marriage that had been quietly altered months or even years after the ceremony. These weren't logged as corrections or updates. They were hidden, folded into the administrative machinery of the crown, approved by individuals who no longer held their positions. When she tried to trace the chain of authorization, entire sections were missing. Catherine wasn't dealing with messy record keeping. She was staring directly at what looked like an intentional rewriting of royal history. Then came the revelation that shook everything. A whistleblower, a retired notary who once handled sensitive royal paperwork, came forward under deep anonymity. Through discreet channels, he informed Catherine that Camilla had failed to disclose certain binding legal obligations from her first marriage, issues that, if accurate, could have rendered her subsequent union technically invalid under both church doctrine and state regulations. This wasn't just about Charles and Camilla's personal relationship. It struck at the constitutional backbone supporting the monarchy's legitimacy. If the second marriage was found to be improperly authorized or incomplete in its legal standing, every role derived from it, including Camilla's current position, would fall under scrutiny. Faced with this instability, Catherine moved with caution. She secretly consulted a constitutional scholar renowned for silence and unmatched knowledge of royal law. Their meeting, insiders say, lasted well over 4 hours. When Catherine emerged, she was ashen, speechless, and unwavering. She understood the truth didn't merely disrupt Camilla's past. It threatened the monarchy's present and its future. It endangered inheritance lines, public confidence, the symbolic unity of the crown itself. And perhaps most devastatingly, she realized this truth had been intentionally buried. What began as a personal inquiry had erupted into a legal and moral disaster. But the real shock wasn't in what Catherine discovered. It was in how Charles reacted when she confronted him. He struck the door with such force it felt like centuries of custom shuddered. When Catherine laid her findings before Charles, it wasn't a family dispute. It was a constitutional detonation, and in the moments that followed, loyalties within the monarchy began to splinter. It unfolded inside Clarence's house, in rooms that had absorbed everything from royal triumphs to private heartbreak, yet nothing as volatile as this. Charles had been warned about what was coming, but the sight of Catherine, entering with those documents, calm, unwavering, every step deliberate, caught him entirely off balance. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She simply presented the truth. The distorted timelines, the concealed legal anomalies, the whistleblower's confession, and the expert assessments confirming exactly what those discrepancies implied. In that instant, the king didn't see a daughter-in-law. He saw an adversary, a threat to his carefully built stability, a threat to Camilla's position, a threat to the fragile storyline he had spent years shaping into something palatable. A staff member lingering outside the door later recalled hearing raised voices, tones they had never imagined echoing through the royal residence. The argument wasn't defensive, it was volcanic. Charles allegedly condemned Catherine for betraying him, for letting suspicion poison her judgment, for using her popularity as a weapon against the monarchy. His fury was scorching, relentless. But Catherine stood firm. One witness described her stance as ice battling flame. Composed, unyielding, she listened without flinching. And when Charles's rage finally burned itself out, she spoke a single line. Truth cannot be treason. The moment turned even more chilling because of William's silence. He was there, watching, listening, absorbing. His face remained unreadable, but those closest to him understood the weight of his quiet. He wasn't passive. He was processing the collision of two worlds he belonged to, knowing that whichever way the fallout landed, something irrevocable would break. This wasn't communication failing. It was trust collapsing between generations, between duty and devotion, between monarchy and morality. Camilla, shielded at first, learned of the confrontation hours later. The revelation reportedly devastated her. She retreated instantly, canceling engagements, avoiding cameras, and withdrawing even from personal interactions. Those who glimpsed her in the following days said she looked hollowed, undone. After decades fighting to secure her place beside Charles, she now watched it slipping away, not because of tabloid scandal, but because of whispers within the palace walls. Behind closed doors, the royal PR machine roared into motion. Carefully crafted statements were prepared, denying everything, yet never specifying what everything meant. Their mission: blur the narrative, muddy the waters, and present unity. But they were too late. The fracture was visible. The silence, the strained appearances, the sudden changes in schedules. Those spoke louder than any official denial. And if Charles believed Catherine would retreat, he misjudged her entirely. What she uncovered next left the monarchy gasping. Locked inside a discreet Kensington drawer was a classified dossier, one Catherine was never meant to find. It contained decades of restricted legal analyses and heavily redacted memos, the kind that could alter the arc of royal history. She stumbled on it by sheer chance, or so the tale goes. Catherine had been reviewing routine paperwork for an upcoming foreign tour when she noticed the unlabeled drawer. On top, it looked insignificant, buried beneath obsolete stationery. But the moment she opened the manila folder stamped with an aged, ominous title, Operation Transcendence, everything shifted. What she found wasn't just sensitive, it was explosive. There were documents typed on yellowing paper, some carrying the royal seal, others signed by advisors long erased from public memory. It felt like discovering a vault of ghosts hidden in daylight. The first file she examined was slashed with black ink. It was a constitutional analysis exploring whether the role of a non-traditional spouse could be reshaped according to emotional optics rather than public approval. 3 separate advisory notes from senior government legal officials were heavily censored, entire sections scratched out with alarming handwritten margins. Avoid examination, expedite through marital reconsideration, and most damning, do not circulate beyond Tier 1. The implications were suffocating. This wasn't merely a discussion of Camilla's role. It was evidence of a deliberate maneuver, legal gymnastics performed behind closed doors, sidestepping oversight from Parliament and public alike. Deeper in the file were printed emails, communications between top royal staff and high-ranking political figures. The language was coded, but unmistakable. Terms like restructured inheritance pathways and alternative legitimacy processes acted as polite disguises for something much more audacious. Catherine understood instantly. These weren't hypotheticals. They were strategies in motion, a blueprint for creating a customized route to queenship built specifically for Camilla. What followed for Catherine was, reportedly, an emotional collapse. In private, she said nothing for hours. Her aides found her motionless, staring at the final document in a file, an annex sealed and stamped internal access only do not preserve. She never revealed what was in that last piece. But from that moment on, something inside her hardened. She didn't destroy it. She didn't hide it. She returned it to the drawer, locked it, and instructed no one to touch it. Her silence, intentional, deliberate, became its own kind of rebellion, a statement that the truth would not be erased. Not again, because that forgotten dossier, concealed yet in plain sight, contained the thread that could unravel the entire royal illusion. Its existence alone proved that Camilla's role had never been inherent. It had been engineered, debated, and ultimately imposed. And now that Catherine possessed the truth, the monarchy's foundation trembled. When word of the dossier leaked into the private inner circle, the royal family broke into factions, each aligning with a side in the escalating war. As the palace descended into chaos, all attention shifted to Prince William. But it was Princess Anne, unyielding, unblinking, whose response stunned everyone. Her quiet defense of Catherine didn't just ignite a feud, it detonated a crisis threatening the monarchy's very foundation. The royal family had endured endless scandals, but never one that turned their own bloodline into battlefield territory. Inside Kensington Palace and Clarence House, the walls learned a new language: silence. William, once unshakably steady, now lived in a quiet torment. He loved his father, but he believed his wife. And between those loyalties stretched a growing fault line that was beginning to rupture. Those who saw William closely said he folded inward, skipping briefings, dodging inquiries, refusing to make any firm stance even behind closed doors. But his silence was louder than any public statement. He didn't rush to shield the institution. He didn't refute Catherine. He simply observed, waited, endured, and in that void, others made their move. Princess Anne's stoic, disciplined, allergic to palace melodrama, broke her lifelong pattern in a moment no one anticipated. In a whispered exchange with a senior advisor, later leaked through discreet channels, she allegedly said Catherine had every right to challenge decisions forced upon her without transparency. One sentence, but coming from Anne, it was an earthquake. Her devotion to the crown was legendary until now. Her willingness to even consider Catherine's concerns sent tremors through every corridor. And the anchor of tradition was no longer simply watching. She was quietly standing with the woman destabilizing the entire system. Prince Edward drifted to the periphery, his remarks vague, his presence inconsistent. Sophie, once warm with both Catherine and Camilla, now seemed emotionally displaced. She smiled in public, but insiders noticed her retreat from private gatherings and her increasing eagerness for overseas duties. Meanwhile, within staff ranks, neutrality was dying fast. Whispers grew into murmurs, murmurs into coded exchanges. The words Queen Catherine began circulating, half joke, half warning. Junior staff cited public sentiment reports showing Catherine's popularity exploding while Camilla's crumbled under scrutiny. Even the palace's grandeur couldn't shield them from the verdict simmering beyond the gates. But the true threat wasn't external. It was the fear mutating inside the institution itself. Security procedures normally reserved for constitutional emergencies were quietly activated. Background checks reset, devices replaced, staff movements monitored, loyalties interrogated, who held access, who leaked, and most dangerously, who was choosing sides. The monarchy survived for centuries on the illusion of unity. That illusion was now shattering. What started as one confrontation had escalated into a silent civil war within the firm, old loyalties dissolving, new alliances forming in shadows. As William's silence deepened and Anne's subtle rebellion drew clearer battle lines, the prospect of collapse shifted from possibility to inevitability. And with tensions at boiling point, the palace reached for one last weapon to stop Catherine, something dredged from Camilla's past. Camilla had no intention of surrendering her crown, so when an anonymous package arrived at Kensington, stuffed with compromising materials and implied threats, the message was unmistakable. No return address, no signature, thick, aged paper, a seal long obsolete. But the detail that froze everyone was the name written across the front, Lady Rose's collection. To most meaningless, but to those who understood, it signaled a defunct aristocratic archive once used to store the monarchy's darkest secrets. Catherine opened it alone. Inside, printed emails, distorted photographs, scattered documents stitched together like a trap disguised as evidence. The contents weren't just aimed, they were engineered. In the center sat suggestive exchanges between a former affiliate of one of Catherine's early charities and a shadowy donor linked to foreign development funds. The intended narrative was unmistakable. Catherine had inadvertently benefited from irregular funds that could be spun as influence manipulation. The emails weren't incriminating on their own, but stripped of context, paired with vague financial records and handwritten insinuations, they constructed suspicion by design. It wasn't truth. It was a weapon crafted to plant doubt, and the package went further. A draft press release, never issued, accusing Catherine's extended family of tax avoidance through offshore foundations. The data flimsy, the evidence patchy, but truth didn't matter. Noise did. The threat was clear: yield or drown under a manufactured scandal. The Royal Press Office, after learning of the file, launched into emergency operation. A charm offensive was drafted overnight. Positive headlines distributed. Public appearances increased. Their strategy wasn't to fight the blackmail, it was to smother it. But William refused the playbook. One look at the file, and something inside him snapped. His anger was icy, deliberate, and aimed with precision. He demanded explanations. He grilled advisors. He pressed those who had remained neutral. For the first time, he stopped defending the institution. Not with words, but through every action he took. What enraged him wasn't the contents. It was the betrayal, the willingness to trade morality for power. Catherine, meanwhile, didn't blink. She examined the file once more, handed it back to the aide, and gave her answer. Let them try. With those 3 words, she made her stand. No fear, no retreat, not even for the crown itself. The monarchy was trembling on the brink, and what came next would send shockwaves across the globe. She had stayed silent for years, but now Catherine stepped forward, eyes firm, voice steady, and shattered centuries of enforced quiet. Her voice was soft, but its impact hit like a fault line snapping. The venue itself looked harmless, a routine charity event focused on children's mental health, the kind Catherine had attended for years. Cameras flashed, guests clapped politely, and everyone expected the usual blend of warmth and advocacy. But the moment she stepped behind the podium, it was clear something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't the poised consort fulfilling protocol. This was a woman stepping into a war zone, ready to speak truth, no matter the cost. She began with kindness, acknowledged the organizers, praised the children. But then she turned, and that single turn changed everything. "I've come to understand," she began, her words deliberate, that silence, while sometimes useful, can also be a kind of surrender. And there comes a point when staying quiet becomes more dangerous than telling the truth. The air froze. The audience leaned in. It wasn't the sentence itself. It was the target hidden between the lines. Anyone paying attention knew she wasn't talking about charity. She was speaking about power, secrecy, and the rot beneath the crown. No names mentioned, none needed. Within minutes, the internet went volcanic. Catherine, the rightful shot to the top of global trends before she even left the building. Millions replayed her speech, breaking down her tone, her pauses, her unwavering eyes. Analysts, reporters, royal experts, for once, agreed on something. This wasn't a scandal. It was a reckoning. The palace's carefully crafted storyline collapsed in real time. Public opinion, already strained by leaks and whispers, now surged in one direction. Where there had been uncertainty, there was now a movement. Catherine wasn't just a royal voice anymore. She had become the woman capable of reshaping the monarchy itself. Former palace advisors who had stayed neutral for decades suddenly stepped forward. A renowned constitutional expert published a formal request for an inquiry into the legal loopholes that led to Camilla's coronation. It wasn't accusatory, it was clinical, but beneath its technical language lay a louder truth. The crown was no longer untouchable. It was officially under scrutiny. Headlines dropped their titles for her. They didn't call her Duchess or Princess. They called her the face of a new royal era. Opinion pieces described her as the moral anchor the monarchy had been missing, a calm force standing against a failing establishment. Even international leaders, normally cautious about commenting on another nation's monarchy, issued carefully worded respect for her courage. She wasn't asking for a throne. She wasn't demanding power. But by speaking, she had claimed something far more potent, moral authority. And just when it seemed the chaos had reached its limit, the palace made a move that rewrote royal history. The announcement didn't come with ceremony. It arrived quietly, almost timidly, inside an early morning bulletin from Buckingham Palace. Her Majesty, the Queen Consort, shall henceforth be styled Princess Consort under revised constitutional arrangements. To outsiders, insignificant. To insiders, explosive. A demotion disguised as clarification. A quiet reversal framed as tradition. And with it, the truth became unavoidable. Camilla's status had never been stable. It had been granted through maneuvering, not earned through mandate. And with Catherine's integrity reshaping the monarchy's moral direction, the palace had made its choice. The silence that followed was thunderous. Soon after, Catherine attended a formal state ceremony dressed in full ceremonial regalia. Her stance was regal, composed, resolute. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her very presence was a declaration. She hadn't seized authority. It had flowed toward her because the institution had run out of credible voices. She didn't need recognition. It simply arrived because no one else could carry the crown's fractured legitimacy into the future. Inside the palace, the fallout had already begun. Charles, once seen as the monarch who would stabilize the post-Elizabeth era, was now noticeably fading. Advisors reported his absence from crucial meetings, his cancellation of major appearances, and his growing distance from day-to-day governance. Those close to him whispered about restless nights and the heartbreak of watching loyalty slip from his grasp. But the deepest wound wasn't the public response. It was realizing that even within his own walls, allegiance had shifted quietly, permanently. William, long described as the balance between past and progress, stepped into a role he never expected this soon. Under guidance from senior constitutional advisors, he began using powers normally reserved for the sovereign during periods of incapacitation. The palace didn't announce it, but behind closed doors, William was already leading, and Catherine was no longer ceremonial partner. She was the backbone of the new monarchy. Historians have already named the moment. They call it the Windsor Reset, the point where heritage bowed to reality, where tradition yielded to truth. Camilla, once the center of a fight for legitimacy, retreated from public life entirely. Her final message, read through an aide, spoke gently of health and privacy. No interviews, no appearances, just silence, her last attempt to leave with dignity. But even with Camilla gone and Catherine ascendant, one question still stalks the palace corridors. What secrets remain buried? And who will be the one to bring them to light? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.